So our topic is hybrid cloud computing. I think there's a certain amount of confusion about that because even cloud computing has a lot of questions swirling around about it, even here in the middle of 2013. So hybrid cloud computing, let's step back a little bit and say, what exactly is it? Is it just applications and data in different locations? Is it different aspects of the software development lifecycle? I mean, Kurt, what's your sense of that? Why don't you lead the way? What is hybrid cloud computing?
Well, I think when I talk to our customers, a lot of them want to extend their data center out to additional compute network storage resources. So I really see hybrid cloud as an extension of a private cloud or an on-premise cloud with cloud capabilities that are managed by another service provider.
David, something to add to that? I mean, is a hybrid necessarily a combination of public and private, or it doesn't denote that necessarily?
Well, I think it does because, if you look at hybrid cloud, kind of comes from the definition from NIST, and what they did was basically try to divide it up into use of private, public, and community. Actually, we forget about that one, and then a combination of two. But there is kind of a new buzzword out there today, which is multi-cloud, which is a tendency to be where most people are heading. So even though some solutions are using one private and one public, for the most part, as we're doing consulting and building systems, we're ending up with, a small handful of public clouds, a small handful of private clouds, lots of tools and technologies and governance and security to kind of bind the whole thing together. So it's becoming a bit more complex. However, I think if we're talking about hybrid cloud computing, really it's very difficult to kind of pinhole it into just public and private. Combined together, we should start talking about a little bit more complex architectures where it's really kind of just more than one cloud.
Andy, your sense of a hybrid cloud, I mean, when customers come to you and say, what is this odd beast named hybrid cloud, does it make sense?
Yeah, look, I tend to take a pretty pragmatic view of these terms. I mean, I'm a big believer in the NIST definitions that David referenced there. I think that's a great baseline, but you've got to be pragmatic about this stuff. I do think hybrid cloud is that combination of public plus private. A lot of people will say that it's about being able to shift workloads and shift data and be dynamic and real-time about moving from that private environment to the public environment. I think that's a strict interpretation. It's a valid one. I tend to be more towards that multi-cloud view. It's interesting. I sort of talk about the cloud of clouds. It is many different things to many different people. But the hybrid cloud, I think it's best to think of that as some combination of public and private, whether it's just all one application, one workload that spans them both. I think that might get into a bit too much sort of a dogma rather than sort of pragmatic use case.
It seems like in the future, most clouds or all clouds at the enterprise level will be hybrid clouds. I can't imagine something being so simple as, well, we have a remote application or a NAS application, and that's the only thing we have. Won't cloud computing be necessarily all hybrid cloud in the immediate future?
Well, I mean, a quick thought on that. I mean, I think one of the things that's driving, David, your idea of the multi-cloud is that these new application architectures are very service-oriented. They're component-based. And so the actual location of the resources behind the different components of a single application may be served from multiple clouds. So, I think there's, I look at the world in terms of, in the past, the traditional application architectures, and then, now and going into the future, these kind of new component-based architectures. And I think so that the cloud starts to serve different purposes for different types of applications.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that ultimately we're just getting into much more complex solutions now. So, a single interface into a cloud service could be, actually a half a dozen other cloud services and a half a dozen tool sets and, a number of different things that are really kind of involved in delivering on that. And so it just becomes kind of a multi-cloud or complex unto itself. But in terms of building solutions for businesses, it's rarely a single public cloud source, and it's rarely a single private cloud source. Typically, it's a multitude of different kinds of technologies, including private and public. So it's just getting a bit more complex. As around the semantics go, I don't really get hung up on it too much. But the definition of a hybrid cloud, being, something that's fairly simplistic, as it was in the past when kind of NIST defined it, is largely going the way of the dodo, and we're ending up with these very complex, high-value architectures, which aren't unlike the complex distributed systems we built years ago, are still building.
Right. So what are some of the common use cases for hybrid cloud? I mean, both good ideas and maybe some things that are actually out there that aren't that perfect. In other words, why should a company consider a hybrid cloud? Andy, your sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the best reasons to consider hybrid cloud is certainly to get the scalability, the flexibility of a public cloud while you've still got some of the utilizing your internal resources and even protecting some of your data on a private cloud environment. So, for example, you might have data that's personally identifiable. You might have to deal with certain compliance regs that mean your database must be inside your firewall, part of your own private cloud. But you want to leverage things, maybe a force.com, maybe leverage AWS for that instance scalability in an external cloud environment. Being able to use a combination of those, and you can flip it around as well, by the way. Looking at some of the API access to third-party clouds, why reinvent the wheel? Why rewrite all this code for yourself, even if you're just delivering an internal app? So you're using your private cloud for the app delivery, the web front end maybe, even middleware, but you're going out to the public cloud to use those APIs and use those predefined services so you can save time and resource, get best practice, and just be able to do what makes you uniquely different and competitive. Focus on that rather than focus on redeveloping the commoditized stuff. So there's a bunch of good use cases for it. There's probably some bad ones as well, but there's a couple of ideas.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, I think we're probably in the first inning as far as the game of figuring out what the use cases are. I think there are, once we get over some of the technology issues, we get over some of the security and compliance concerns, and then we get into the operational issues of managing across environments. Once people get comfortable with those, then I think we're going to unleash the creativity of developers and the folks that are really driving the kind of the killer apps in the new era, and see what happens. But I know at VMware, we're moving a lot of our enterprise app dev test instances into our private cloud, and that's 90% of the VMs for those things are in all of the phases of the SDLC cycle before production. And then once that's done, we're actually considering moving then the production instances into the hybrid cloud service that we offer. So it's kind of it's a backwards from I think what a lot of people are thinking about, but we're actually thinking about moving production into the public cloud and keeping the dev test in the lower service level private cloud. So again, I think the way this rolls out is to be determined.
David, your sense of that?
Yeah, I think he's right. I mean, ultimately, if we're talking about the use case of this, no matter what the architecture is, it's the ability to kind of leverage components that are very cloud-like and ultimately scalable and elastic internal to the company, and be able to leverage assets that are outside the company as we need them. So if you think about it, you're taking good economic advantage of a private cloud, you're getting close to the saturation point. And instead of going off and having to buy waves and waves of software to support, a very short increment in time, the ability to, in essence, move it out into the public cloud for a temporary kind of processing thing. But I do see in the future the ability to kind of relocate components, perhaps even VMs and those sorts of things that are starting to appear today between private and public cloud instances, and that's innately interesting because we, in essence, can scale and balance and put things where we trust the environments and move things in between various platforms and systems. That makes most economic sense from efficiency and scalability and reliability, all these sorts of things. So it gives us choices. So as architects, we're able to change the systems around the needs of the business fairly quickly because we have these assets online, private instance that we own for whatever reason that needs to occur, and then public instances that we don't own, but are the commoditized systems we need to leverage from time to time. I think it's the best of both worlds.